Welcome to Our Time. We get our information in so many different ways today. We get it from non-professionals on all of the different platforms, and we also, of course, get it the old-fashioned way from journalists. And our special guest is Kerry Green. Kerry, welcome to Our Time.
Thank you, Mark.
Where did journalism start for you?
Well, it started for me back in Cairns in 1967, and I was halfway through my year 12 at good old St Augustine's College, and my older brother was a journalist at the Cairns Post, and he joined the army and went off to Vietnam. And on the way out through the Cairns Post doors, he said to the editor, "I've got just the bloke to replace me."
My brother.
My little brother, you'd really like him. So that's how I got in. I got in the best way possible through nepotism.
Yes, well, sometimes that's the only way, let's face it. So were you, as a child at school, did you write essays about life events? Or?
Yes. As a child at school, I was always curious about the world. And I think that's the absolute and ultimate characteristic that you need if you're going to be a journalist. And we see...
I think in many ways, if you're going to be a human, you need to find out as much about the place we live, the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Really. If you don't know, you don't live properly, or you don't live to the fullest, I think.
How would you describe yourself now, looking back over an amazing career, which we're going to talk about, but how would you describe yourself?
Tired. No. I think I've really enjoyed my career as a journalist. Of course, I was... half my career was as a journalist, the other half was as a journalism academic. And both of those elements of my career were good. In universities, yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I've enjoyed both those elements. They've been great because they give you an opportunity to engage with people. But I also think the most important thing about journalism is that you have a chance to improve the world for everybody else. You have a chance to make the world a better place. Everything you do, everything you publish can make the world a better place. It's a privilege to be able to do that.
Information to everybody is so relevant though, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Because we can't possibly be there to see everything and know everything that's happening all over the world. And today, journalism, particularly on television, I guess, where you're getting hopefully unbiased views about the rest of the world, we really do rely on journalists to educate us.
Absolutely, and that's, I think, an important aspect that people forget about. If you look at the journalists who are working in Australia today, many of them are members of an association called the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, which has a code of ethics which journalists should work to. The Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance says that journalism is there to educate, entertain and inform. And it's that informing and educating element that's important to people. That's how people's lives are made better.
Let's go back to your career. So you're a young man, you've started in, was it a major city newspaper?
No, I started at the Cairns Post. It was a daily newspaper.
Was Cairns a major city then, though?
Yeah, it was about 25,000, 30,000 people, and it had a daily newspaper, which was the Cairns Post.
Yep.
It was a funny experience, Malcolm, because when I went in there, they put me in what they call the reading room, and I didn't have to write anything at all. All I had to do was read what other people were writing. And
was that to proof?
Yeah, it was proofreading, right. Yeah, to look for mistakes and arrange style and become familiar with style. Eventually, they stuck me in the newsroom and sent me out with absolutely no information whatsoever.
Best way to learn, though, isn't it?
Go and do a story about whatever. And after about a month of it, I said to the sub-editors in the room, I said, who am I writing for? Who is it that's reading this stuff? What's my audience? And they said, well, Kerry, you're writing for, people like us. Look, around the newsroom, people like us. And I looked around the newsroom, and there were about a dozen people in there who all looked like I look like now. In their 60s, balding, grey-haired, and all male. Not a woman to be seen anywhere. Thankfully, things have changed.
Yes, they have changed. And necessarily, it's amazing that wasn't the case.
Yes. Yeah, so things changed a lot at the Cairns Post. It was a good training ground, and I still say to aspiring journalists today to get out into the country and get your basic training out there, because you get exposed to so many different kinds of news events and stories that you just wouldn't get if you're starting out in the big cities.
And probably the sad thing today is journalists have to cope with the blood and gore that from accidents not that long ago, with a major fire and collapse of a building and so on and so on. That must be very hard to come in and see that destruction. It is, and there's a lot of research being done at the moment, mostly coming out of the US, but there are a number of academics here in Australia doing it. In fact, University of South Australia has got a person who's about to graduate with her PhD, who's done some significant research into it. And it shows that almost all journalists are going to be exposed to those sorts of things that you mentioned. Some of them are going to be exposed to events that are so traumatic that they suffer PTSD. Not everybody will, but some will. Hard to leave a job in any case without going home and taking some of that memory home with you. Did you ever experience that? Luckily, not for me, no. But my wife did. My wife's a journalist. I mentioned nepotism before, right? So my brother was a journalist, his wife was a journalist, I'm a journalist, my wife was a journalist, my cousin was a journalist. So some of those people who are very close to me, in fact, did experience that sort of trauma. And some of them have taken a long time to get over it, I must say. I can understand that. So in your ongoing life story, so you're living in Queensland, you're in Cairns, and obviously all journalists move up the ladder as time goes on. Where did you go to next? Yeah, I went to the Queensland Times in Ipswich, just outside Brisbane. I went there as editor. It's a daily newspaper, a fantastic training ground again. And how old were you then? Yeah, I was young. I was 28, I think it was. Yeah, I asked that because I think everybody that comes out of uni or wherever today that wants to be anything wants to start up there and forgets you've got to actually climb the ladder to get to there. Yes. Yeah, and there's a lot of things you have to do along the way, I think, to prove your mettle, if you like. One of the things that happened to me was that the Cairns Post had the distinction of being the first daily newspaper, the first newspaper in Australia to completely computerise. We went from journalists writing stories into a computer to punching it out the other end on a computer typesetter. So going straight to press from there. Right. So when you started, was there a typesetter that physically put the letters into trays? Yeah, to do absolutely. All of that? When I first started, it was what they call hot metal. Yep. So all of the things that you've just described, linotype machines, steaming, smoking, lead, the smell of it all. The ink was everywhere. Smell of the ink. Yeah. The roar of the paper. And of course the press itself ran at night time, and it ran with hot metal. So it was just a roaring, noisy beast. What does hot metal actually mean? I've heard that expression many times. Hot metal means that people working on what looks like a great big typewriter machine have ingots of lead in a pot beside the machine, and that lead is melting. It's molten lead in the pot. As they press an A slug of the molten metal runs across a little tray, and makes an imprint comes down, makes an A. Yeah, so A-N-D makes an and, a space. T-H-E makes a that. How far we've come. Yeah. And I'm amazed that so many of the people who were linotype operators and press hands didn't actually suffer from more illnesses than they actually did. Yeah, incredible. But when you think back even prior to that, where you literally were picking up the letters and putting them in those lines, just extraordinary how far it's come. The really dangerous part was for the press hands who would put it all into a frame, a page big, push it under a press and make an imprint. And you could tell who worked on those pieces of machinery because they had fingers that were cut off here, fingers that were cut off there.
Just had to look at them. Oh, you work on a press.
When you buy a newspaper, anybody does anymore, you don't realise not only how far has it come
Yes.
to physically come to your house, but how far the whole concept of printing newspapers has been, or magazines, or books, or anything else for that matter.
Exactly so.
So, obviously, journalism has changed dramatically. What do you think have been the most major changes in the time you've been part of the business?
Well, the major changes have been forced, I think, on newspapers by technology. And the major change that I see that's affecting the quality of journalism is the fact that a reporter is now all things to all people. Not only do you interview people and create the story and write the story, but you send it off to the typesetters as well. So you're everything to the news story. Once upon a time, there were sub-editors interposed between you. Once upon a time, headline writers. Once upon a time, check subs. Those people typically don't exist anymore.
Yes, genuinely, it sort of makes you think. With a journalist, not only you're collecting the information, but you've got to be able to talk to people and suck that information out of them. But then you've got to be able to write it. It makes common sense.
I think it demands a lot of the person who's writing a story, which is why I'm so in awe of the young people who come out of our universities and do go into the news industry. So much is being asked of them now that wasn't asked of me when I was a kid.
Right. But that's what we're going to talk about after this break. We're going to talk about just what's happened and what's changed in journalism over the last, let's say, 40 years, just to be kind to both of us. We'll be back in a tick. Our guest on this program is Kerry Green, and we're talking about journalism, and now we're talking about how it's changed from when you first began in Cairns in that little paper.
Yes. Well, some things have changed, some things haven't. I just want to mention some of the research that I've been doing over the years. I came across a story that indicated just how powerful journalism can be. It was a story from the ancient Egypt of the Pharaoh's times, where, in fact, a worker complained that a supervisor of work on the pyramids was corrupt, and he was taking money that was meant for the workers, their food, etc., and using it in brothels and naughty things anyway.
I like the naughty things.
As a result, the Pharaoh got involved, and Pharaoh's vizier got involved, and it ended up with an execution. And the whole workplace changed over. And I thought, wow, that's an example of whistleblowing and journalism. And it reminded me that one of the things that I saw as a journalist was very similar. It was in the 1980s in Queensland, and the Joh Bjelke-Petersen government was in power in Queensland. It was known to be, well, not exactly kosher. And as a result, there's something called the Fitzgerald Inquiry, brought about by the news media. As a result, the Bjelke-Petersen government fell, and an entirely new government was instituted. So some things changed, some things don't. Back in the days of the pharaohs, journalism was powerful. Even today, journalism is powerful and can bring down governments.
Well, we can't go past that point without perhaps talking about Trump in America, because there seem to be some journalists that favour his way of government, and there's some that are obviously telling the truth. Not to suggest that I don't believe what he's saying, but I mean, really, how intelligent are we or aren't we?
I think it's sad that we do have those kinds of news organs, if you like, that are willing to give him time, give him airtime.
It makes you wonder, though, I know they're obviously not on a payroll of his, but it makes you wonder why these distruths are being told, and so constantly, and reported, what's more.
You know what? I think there's a laziness involved. It's easy just to take what's being spouted at you and put it out there and use it without questioning fully and deeply.
Yes, I love the program on the ABC on a Monday night.
Yes.
that it goes through all of those things and is like a wonderful fact checker. In fact, it's amazing that there's not more fact checking reported. I think that's possibly an area that needs to be also looked at,
Yes.
to debunk some of the myths that some people have written or reported on.
So one of the things that people talk about is objectivity in journalism and whether objectivity is obtainable or not. I think the general idea, or everyone has probably accepted that absolute objectivity in reporting, in other words, finding what is black and what is white and distinguishing between them, is probably not attainable. But I don't think we should just throw out the idea as well. Something that I've been seeing lately is something called constructive journalism. And I think it's a wonderful thing.
And what does that exactly mean?
Yeah, well, look, it comes out of the Institute for Constructive Journalism in the Netherlands. And essentially it says, we don't always know what's right and what's wrong, but if we know that something doesn't sound right or something is a little bit skewed, then we should be digging deeper. We don't necessarily ourselves say, this is what's right and this is what's wrong, but we find more and more information about
both sides of the story.
And we keep putting it out there and we keep putting it out there so that eventually people have enough information to make up their own minds.
It's the old story, if it smells bad, it probably is.
Exactly, yes. Constructive journalism, I think it works.
Well, how have the platforms like Facebook, Instagram and so on, how have they affected journalism? Because they're basically, in most cases, amateur journalists writing the stuff that's there.
And it's affected journalism in many different ways, but one way, which I'm really sad to note, is that that kind of journalism, or that kind of communication, I don't call it journalism, that kind of communication is conflated with the journalism that professionals do. And there is a vast difference between them. First of all, there is a code of ethics that professional journalists should abide, and most do abide by, whereas social media communication doesn't require that of you.
No, well, again, in print media, there's always opinion columns, and you accept that's the opinion of the writer, and that's fine, but they're usually not reporting news as such, or what's actually happening in the world. They're commenting on it. That's different, and usually well written.
Yes.
When you're getting your news and your information in short bursts that last for 15 seconds, you can't possibly understand the depth.
That's right. And the distinction in, say, print and TV, usually the opinion is headlined as opinion or comment, whereas in social media, not so often anyway. No,
I think it's confusing, and I think people, particularly younger people who've engaged with this form of communication, don't get the full story and go off in tangents where the truth is not necessarily the truth.
Yeah, one of the other things I think that's different, you can distinguish between them, is the kinds of publishers and the audiences that we're talking about now. So once upon a time, for the mass media, you could talk about a communication model that was one to many. There was one journalist talking to a huge audience out there. Now with social media, it's a kind of a many-to-many type thing. There's a whole range of people somewhere.
The followers of whoever is saying all of that.
And there's good and bad about that, because now people can actually get back to the person who's communicated, putting the communication out there and saying, I disagree with you, and did you know that this happened and that happened?
True.
And you could never do that before, but you can now.
But is that the one benefit of... And I can't think of many more, but is that the one benefit, that you can be called to task?
It is one benefit, and you can be called to task. But Malcolm, if you've been watching the newspapers, you'll notice that those email addresses at the bottom of people's stories have largely disappeared now. They're only there now for the opinion columns and not for the news columns, because of the trolls who are getting back to journalists.
Yes, see, that's frightening, isn't it? That people think they know better than professional people. It's like going to the doctor and saying, oh, well, you've told me I've got this problem, but I'm not going to accept that. I'm just going to because I'm so intelligent, I'm just going to go off and
Yes.
breathe air for treatment or whatever. I mean, it's as silly as that analogy.
Yeah, and it's silly in another way too. I mean, we live in what's called a market economy, and one of the precepts about market economy is that to make really good decisions about what to buy, what to sell, consumption, all that sort of thing, you must have perfect knowledge of the market. You must know how the market's operating. Now, of course, it's impossible to get perfect knowledge, but with a mass communication, you have a chance, at least, of knowing what's going on in the market. With a many-to-many model, you don't. It's a fragmented market. You don't know what's happening in all elements of the market. So I think that's one of the many...
And all demographics, no doubt, as well, of age and financial abilities. And
Exactly. It's a real disadvantage. There are advantages, as I say. The audience can talk to the writers, if you like, in the social media, but then they miss out on other things that you would get in a mass medium publication.
Has it been a disadvantage to humankind to lose the impact that print media originally had, do you think?
It has, and if I could digress for a moment, there's an archive called, I've lost it, an archive at National Library Association Australia in Canberra that has all newspapers in Australia archived. Now, most of it's on microfiche, but some of it has been digitised. And what that means is the lives of Australians are available to other Australians on that archive. The digitised version is fantastic. You can just get online and ask for a particular thing. What happened to Uncle Joe in Bendigo back in 1948 or whatever it was? Or what was happening with photography in such and such a place, such and such a time?
Well, last week we were looking at old radios, which is sort of another one of those things that just sometimes looking at the past leads us to the future. Speaking of which, our future is a quick break and we'll be back in a tick. We've been talking to academic and journalist Kerry Green. Academic because that's what you've been doing for a while.
Indeed it is, yes. And at the moment I'm doing some research into an archive that we're very fortunate to have at University of South Australia. It's an archive of newscasts that we managed to purloin, if you like, when Channel 7 and Channel 10 here in Adelaide changed call signs.
Yes,
they swapped over, that's right.
Very confusing.
It was confusing, still is, I think.
Well, neither of the buildings exist anymore that the call sign was swapped for either, which is confusing too.
But the good thing is all the newscasts from both stations now exist, and we've got them at University of South Australia. Unfortunately, they're film and video, and they're starting to deteriorate, and I'm happily trying to get them digitised before they disappear into history, and we can't use them anymore, because they're a fantastic look at what Adelaide was like back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Some go back to the 70s.
Why do you think history and reporting of history is so important for the future?
Yeah, I think it is important because we need to know what we've done in the past, what people thought and did in the past, so that we can build on that and build a better future. If you don't know what's happened in the past, you're just going to repeat the same thing over and over.
Same mistakes over and over again.
Exactly.
And that's history, isn't it?
Yes, it is history. Yeah.
Kerry, it's been so lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
It's been great to have your company as well here on OurTime. So until next time, trust the journalists to tell the truth. We'll see you soon.